Ashislayu Hatuasak, Kiksadi Ayachat, Kahit Nachatsati, Kagwantan Dutchkan Ayachat, Kachachashana Chatsati. My Tlingit name is Ashishla, and that name was actually Peter Simpson's wife's name, Mary Sloan Simpson. I am Kiksadi from the Point House here in Sitka, grandchild of the Kagwantan Wolf House here in Sitka as well. And we Herring ladies are known as, or we Kiksadi women are known as the Herring ladies, which is the Kachat Jasha. My English name is Louise Brady. I was born here in Sitka in 1956 and was raised here. I have traveled some, but this primarily has been my home as well as my family's home for a few thousand years now.
And could we talk about your mother?
Yes.
And
so since we're matrilineal, of course my mother was also a Point House, Kahit. Her Tlingit name was Yedi Kuka, and her English name is Isabella Brady. She also was born and raised here. She was born February 18th, 1924. To Peter and Jenny Singh.
And so Jenny was the daughter of Peter and Mary Simpson?
Yes, Jenny was Peter and Mary Sloan Simpson's daughter. So Peter Simpson was my mother's grandfather. And then my mother's father was Peter Singh, who was the son of Sam Singh, who I was told came over from Canton, China to San Francisco, then up to Seattle, where apparently he lived for a while. And then my mother said he came up to Sitka as a cabin boy for Brady, who became the territorial governor. And we believe that Sam Singh met his wife. It could have been during the gold rush, is what we're thinking, that Sam Singh probably went up to the Haines, Chilkat area, and met a Tlingit woman, and they got married, and came back down here. Sam and his wife. But according to my mother, her brothers were not happy that she had married a Chinese man. So they came down here and got her and took her back up north to the Haines-Chilkat area. And so Sam Singh raised my grandfather, Peter Singh, as a single parent, single dad.
What do you know about that grandmother?
Really?
Or who she was? Or?
We don't. We really don't know a lot. There was actually, I wish I could find her name. So what we know is that she went back to Haines. She ended up marrying, I believe, another Tlingit man. And I heard that she had moved to the Petersburg area with him. And because one of my mother's cousins from that marriage, our descendant from that marriage, would come over and visit, and apparently had done quite a bit of family research. But I cannot remember her name. I'd probably have to talk with maybe my sisters or my brother, because she would actually come and stay, and she said she had done quite a lot of research from that part of the family.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And then your grandmother, Jenny. So I know just from like looking at different records that your great grandfather Peter Simpson and his wife experienced the loss of a lot of children, many
Yes.
children.
Yes. As well as, okay, so my mother said that was pretty common, as well as so did, so you're talking about Peter and Jenny Simpson, or?
Peter Simpson and Mary Sloan Simpson.
Yeah. So my mother didn't talk so much about that. But she did talk about, her mother probably having lost a few children as well.
Did your mother know, was she old enough to know of any of them, or it was before she was?
The only one that she really talked about was Henry. Henry Singh, and I think he was the one that died. I want to say there was someplace like the Boy Scout cabin. He and 3 other young men were out on a skiff, out on a boat. And I think she said they had been drinking, and I think all 4 of them died. And I think they were all 4 from the cottages. I believe one may have been Gil Truitt's brother, one of Gil Truitt's brother. His father, yeah. Which I believe was pretty devastating, obviously, to the family. The other thing she said is that she believed that Henry was not her full blood brother, so that he would have had a different father than my mother, and that was the cause for a lot of conflict between her parents.
So how many children were in your, or how many children survived in your mother's family?
There's my mother, and then Lucille, who was, I believe, 2 years younger than my mother. So she would have been born in 1926. And then Sam Singh. So there were 3 of them in the household.
After the loss of Henry?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what became of them, or do they?
So one of the things I think my mother said is about her mother, though, it was that she was a midwife, or I don't know what you would call. So she apparently delivered a lot of children. And she died at a very young age, I think in her 30s, probably early 30s. And I know that my mother used to talk a lot about just how much death. There was just so much death all the time at that time. And
so from TB, alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I mean, I got to look at one point, I had access to some of the Presbyterian records, church records, and that recorded, you know, the funerals and baptisms, all of that. And I want to say it was from the 1920s. I was pretty amazed that just how many deaths there were. I mean, you know, here, people nowadays, it's like they say it comes in threes, but I mean, it was amazing the number of funerals that they would have every month recorded in that book.
And I remember a really long time ago talking to Ellen Hope Hayes about the cottages, and she stated that it was the deaths that was the what was behind, you know, the what we now call trauma. You know.
I mean, so my mother would tell this story of, so she was 16 when her mother died, Jenny Singh, and my mother must have felt like the caretaker for Uncle Sam and Aunt Lucille, but her mother her health had been failing, and the doctor had told Jenny Singh that if she didn't quit drinking, she would be dead within 6 months. And so this was my mother's mother talking to her when she was 16, and she told my mother that's what the doctor had said. And then she looked at my mother and she said, I know that you'll take good care of your brother and your sister. And she was dead within 6 months. Yeah. And I know that, and you know, and my mother used to talk about just how much she hated her father because he was an alcoholic and he was very violent. And she said after her mother died, she was really, really angry with God because she loved her mother so much and she hated her father, and she was really upset that God had taken her mother and not her father. And I think that, you know, life probably was pretty hard. And somehow apparently she said she was really angry. She was really, really, really angry after her mother passed away. And somehow she got hooked up with Sheldon Jackson High School. And there she met a missionary, Louise Weeks, who basically she credits with saving her life because she said that she didn't know where she would have ended up had she not gone to Sheldon Jackson and met Louise Weeks and became a Christian. And she also expressed feelings of guilt about leaving her brother and sister had to stay in the home with their father.
Where was their home?
You know what? I have never been really able to get a sense of that. When she talked about, you know, their family, it was always either living with Peter and Jenny Simpson or Sam Singh. So I don't know where else they might have lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so she decided, and you know, it must have been a difficult decision for her, but she did decide to go ahead and I guess move in at Sheldon Jackson. And she started what would be kind of a lifelong friendship. Louise Weeks was more of a mentor to her, probably more like a mother to her than anything. And Ralph Weeks, who, I was named after Louise Weeks, and my brother was named after Ralph Weeks.
So was Ralph Weeks, was that?
He was a Presbyterian minister. He also came up to Sheldon Jackson. And we grew up calling him Aunt Louise and Uncle Ralph. They met here and ended up getting married, is my understanding. And he ended up being a minister, Presbyterian minister, I think in Barrow and in Anchorage. And I want to say that I believe that Aunt Louise and Uncle Ralph co-signed on the house that my parents bought on Bjorka.
So what year was that they bought the house?
1964? Yep, 1964. They were both working on the island. I think my mother was working Mount Edgecombe High School. And my father, I'm not sure. Bless you.
Sorry.
I think he was an electrician, probably for the BIA. And he got that job. He lied, saying he had electrical experience. And then I can't remember his name. Was it Pastor Cup? Anyway, whoever hired him obviously found out that he really didn't know what he was doing, but ended up teaching him.
Oh.
So, which I'm sure wouldn't happen nowadays.
So where was your family living when you were born?
Oh gosh, on the island we lived probably in three different apartments. There was one across from on the boys' dorm in that area, and then there was one by the water treatment plant that was a house, and then the last one was over on Alice Loop, and we were just down from the Truitts.
Oh.
Actually, I was the flower girl for Gil and Shirley's wedding.
So I've talked to Carol Feller Brady,
Mm-hmm.
and then also read her memoir.
Yes.
And but she talks about your mother being I don't know, bossy.
Yes. No.
Being the leader of their games, like
Right. Yes. 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 And she would talk about that. And I don't know why. I think I asked her one time. She started a doe club, DOE, doe club, and it probably was just for the children at the cottages. And I don't know if that was like an answer to the Elks or whatever, but yeah, she talked about organizing all of the games and keeping them busy, and she talked a lot about how she had no idea that they were poor. When she was 8, she started working for Peter Simpson. She was his bookkeeper. And she talked about how Peter Simpson had taught her about public speaking. It was over in this house. If she would have an assignment like for speech, or I don't know what they would call it back then, and if she had to speak in public, Peter Simpson would make her go upstairs and recite whatever it was she was supposed to be reciting, and if he couldn't hear her, he would tell her to talk louder.
Oh.
And then she talked too about the allotment. It must have been the Allotment Act. Because it seems to me she was talking about how the family had used Glencan Island, or the lighthouses.
Mm-hmm.
And she said the people came around and they were talking about how they could get their land, how they could keep their land, and there must have been a lot of really bad, like really misinformation going around, because she said that they were told if they planted potatoes that they would be able to keep their land.
Mm-hmm.
So she said that a lot of the people who were eligible for those allotments probably were just were not. I mean, there were so many people, I'm sure, that couldn't speak English, and to have to go through that process of filling out the papers and.
Because I was wondering about that too, because I think it was like turn of the century, there was a thing where you could like file claims
Yes.
for land that you'd used
Yes.
before, and hardly anybody did it.
Yep.
So yeah, you figure there's something going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey,
This
exactly.
misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody's going out of their way.
Right. To say, oh, yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, it didn't work. And then she talked about how she would, Grandpa Simpson was apparently buying fish out, where is it? Just before you head into Peril Straits. On the
Salisbury?
Yeah, Salisbury, one of the bays in there. They'd buy fish. Yes, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they would buy fish out there, and she would talk about rowing in the boat. They didn't have a motor boat, and she would like row for miles and miles. And she talked about, said during the Depression that, yeah, they didn't know it didn't seem to be a lot different than any other time, and sometimes they, all they would have was flour and not a whole lot else, and but they would make do.
Wow. And so it sounded like she had a really strong relationship with her grandfather.
Yeah.
And when did her grandmother pass away?
I don't know, because she never really talked about her grandmother a whole lot. Because it was like, when she went, well, she definitely, I guess, probably, like at Sheldon Jackson, she would talk about Sheldon Jackson and just how strict they were there, going to and from breakfast, and just having to make their beds, like the hospital corners, and bouncing having to bounce the quarters off the sheets, making sure that they were made correctly, and then that's where she, I think, probably picked up her love of basketball. I think Aunt Louise was coaching.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, Aunt Louise apparently was a good basketball fan. But then when she enlisted during World War II. She was a wave. And I think she said she went to training in New York City. And then she ended up being on the Northwest women's basketball team. She was 5'2", right? Barely. And she was the center. Yeah. And she enlisted because they were saying, if you enlist and you can take an office job, that'll free up somebody to, be able to carry a gun.
So is that a patriotism?
Yeah. Yeah, and then when she came back, for some reason she decided that she wanted to go to college. And so she went to Peter Simpson, who apparently never really had a lot of money, and he was able to scrape some money together and give her some. And she went, and she also went to Sam Singh and asked him as well, and he said, absolutely not. You know, you're a woman, and your place is to stay home and have children and take care of your children and your husband. But she ended up going anyway, and it was a Presbyterian college in North Dakota, and she had to take a steamboat and a train. And she would talk about being so homesick because she had to stay there all 4 years because they didn't have enough money for her to come back. And she just talked about being so homesick that she would just be literally sick, but she was getting physically ill. But she made it. She said that, you know, her grades weren't very good. She was always disappointed in herself. And she talked about how being down there, that when people would find out she was from Alaska, they're like, oh, are you an Eskimo? And, but she ended up being successful in getting her bachelor's degree in education. And then she came back here and went to work at Sheldon Jackson.
What was her degree in?
I want to say education.
And what did she do at Sheldon Jackson?
Oh, I don't think she taught at Sheldon Jackson. I want to say she probably worked with it, like the girls dorm. I believe Aunt Louise was still there. And I don't know if that's it. It probably wasn't the era. I know it. One of my favorite stories about Mom and Aunt Louise and Dad. It could have been later, but so my mother was coaching the girls' basketball team here. And she would get so excited. She was so enthusiastic. So my father and Aunt Louise went to watch a game, and the girls were playing, and Mom was getting like overly excited and just running up and down the court, you know, next to the girls, yelling at them. And my dad kind of looked at Aunt Louise, and he's like, oh my gosh, you know, just getting, I guess, exasperated with her. And so Aunt Louise was, okay, I'll go talk to her. I'll go calm her down. And so he was back to watching the game, and Aunt Louise went down to the floor to try to calm Mom down. But the next thing Dad saw is both Aunt Louise and my mother were running up and down the court, yelling at the girls. He loved to tell that story. So apparently Aunt Louise is a big lover of basketball too. So yeah, so that was probably one of the things that she did, is when she went back. And I'm not sure how long she was at Sheldon Jackson.
And then did she work somewhere else, or have kids, or?
Mount Edgecombe. She got a job, and I'm not sure if she started out as a teacher, but she ended up eventually overseeing the whole girls' dorm, which at that time, you know, I want to say there were over 700 students at Mount Edgecombe. So I remember her. We really didn't see her much. So the time I remember my grandfather being like our primary caregiver, because both Mom and Dad were working. And I want to say my mother was probably working the swing shift, if not, you know, 12 hours a day or whatever, you know, overseeing 300 girls from all over the state.
So your grandfather,
Peter Singh.
Oh.
Yeah, he ended up, I mean, I'm sure he was drinking from time to time, but he ended up staying with my parents and pretty much, yeah, being our primary caregiver. So I remember him cooking dinner. I remember him, you know, being there after school.
So what do you remember about him? Or?
I remember him as being gentle. I mean, but he could also he could also be tough. He was a really good cook. He mainly cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One time, the toughness. So my mother had curled my hair with pin curls, the bobby pins. I think it was for the 4th of July or something. And she had put this knit hat on me with a little hook under it. And I was sleeping on the top bunk, and I had a rude awakening, and I fell off the top bunk and knocked the tooth out, the tooth through my lip here. And I was crying pretty hard, and probably for a long time. And then my grandpa came and was trying to give me a piece of dry fish and said, "Here, be quiet, chew on this." But I mean, I have a lot of good memories of him, and he lived with us until he passed.
So, and that was, or actually before, so what do you know about the Sloans, about your great grandmother, and where she came from?
Not a lot, just that she was Point House, so, Mary Sloan. I don't have it right now, I should have brought it. But, so yeah, we have, going back probably 7 generations, our family tree that I can look at.
Oh.
I think we can go back to, like, another name is Yayi Taudaskane, which is also, I want to say that was probably Jenny Sloan Simpson's mother's name.
Oh, okay.
And I believe she was married to a Wishkitan shark. But she must not have been around. And then one further generation back from that we can go to. And I want to say that, so her maternal grandfather was Chukanadi, a Chukanadi man named Wank, W-A-N-K. And I can probably get those names too.
Yeah, that would be really neat to kind of put it together. Because I asked Harold Jacobs about, because I was trying to figure out who, because there's, photos of the cottages, and there's Mr. and Mrs. Sloan.
Yes.
It's like, who are these people?
I know, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he had some, guesses and.
Yeah. So that, right. So, and that's how, through the Sloan sisters, Kathy Hope, Jerry Hope were related. They're descendants of the Sloan sisters. So all of the Hopes, Karen Lang, and then also one of the names that I have is Carol Brady Feller's father's mother's name is related to Carol as well through the Sloan sisters. And the Truitt, and Gil Truitt.
Yeah, that would be great, having their names and clans would be so.
I know. It takes a long time. I was just talking to Harold because I've been, so Ashish Tla would have been my given name, which is Jenny Sloan Simpson's name. And then I was given the name Yayi Taudaskane. I think that was at probably my mother's and Jennifer's party. And then at then there was something else that we did. I was given a third name, and that was Carol Feller Brady's name. And I always wondered, if I was asking Harold, and it just takes a while to figure out. I said, I would use this name if I was at a party for any of Carol Brady Feller's family, and and then I would use this name in this instance. So it's like, oh, okay. It takes a while to figure that out. So you're kind of, I think, a way of acknowledging all of your relatives and how you're related. It's kind of neat. I mean, it's really...
Going back 2 ways. And
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And that was so that was the other thing is how aware of her Native heritage do you think your mother was growing up?
I don't think she was, and I think that it was really interesting to me because Mom always used to talk about how Dad didn't show up for the wedding the first couple times, and then he showed up the third time, and it was interesting because they were both Kiksadi, and it was 1950. Mom wasn't raised traditionally. My dad was raised by Anna Hoots and his wife, and his wife was Rudolph Walton's sister. So he was raised by some pretty traditional folks. Rudolph Walton, of course, went back and forth between the church and tradition, but Presbyterian church and tradition. And in fact, my father grew up with the name Rudy Jackson. So that's who people knew him as. And what had happened is that his parents had abandoned him. His parents had abandoned him in Juneau, I think when he was 6 months old. And so Anna Hoots' wife went over and got him, and so Anna Hoots and his wife, Mary, raised him. And when they took him, they gave him the name Rudy. And he took their last name, Jackson. So that's who he knew himself as, was Rudy Jackson. And it was after Rudolph Walton and, of course, Anna Hoots Jackson. And it wasn't until he went to enlist in World War II in the Army that there was no Rudy Jackson. There was no record of a Rudy Jackson. So that's when he found out his name. His birth name was William Brady, after his father.
And how, do you know anything about his birth parents?
No, not a lot at all. His mother's name was Jenny.
Or I wonder what the circumstances were that they gave him up.
I think they were drinking. They were drinking a lot, and I think that. And I've tried to find out. So there's an interview that my dad did with Charlie Joseph, and the transcripts from that were published in one of the Downhauer's books, and in there it mentions Charlie Joseph says, "Oh, and your dad," he says his Tlingit name, and so I found that out, and I started asking everywhere because they thought he was Kagwantan as well. And so all over the place I said, "Have you ever heard this name? Have you ever heard this name?" And nobody ever heard it. Harold said he thought he may have identified the house that he came from. And I want to say, I don't know, because those are like the kind of the two unknowns that are my dad's father and my mother's mother. No, mother's father's mother. Anyway. But I'm still, I still ask people. So yeah, when he came over here and he lived with Anna Hoots, there was the long-standing battles between the Sitka and the Wrangell clans. And Anna Hoots took him over when he was 2 years old to Wrangell in 1924 for apparently the last peacemaking ceremony that actually worked.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's where he got, so his birth name was Qananaste, and then he got the name Shlusta when he was over in Wrangell for that peacemaking ceremony. And he said that, again, that was kind of a long-standing thing. His Anna Hoots was really worried about my dad when he ended up going over to Wrangell Institute because they were afraid that because he was from Sitka and he was related to Anna Hoots that there could be problems for him. But he said there weren't any problems for him. So, and his first language was Tlingit. And so, yeah, he was raised very traditionally. And he, so when my parents got married, right, in 1950, I could imagine that possibly part of the reason my dad didn't show up the first 2 times, aside from he had been drinking a lot, but was that he had been raised traditionally. And they were both Kiksadi. And in the traditional way, that was seen as incest. So when they married, yeah, we didn't really ever hear any Tlingit spoken. My mom, she had us join a dance group, Judy and I think. Was it Judy and I? And I don't know if that would have been the Cross Mountain Dancers or what. I vaguely remember dancing at the A&B Hall on stage. So I think she definitely tried to keep us connected somehow.
And when did the SNAP start?
1974.
Oh, okay.
So she was at the dorm. She taught, or she was the head of the girls' dorm, probably until she started SNAP. And she remembers one time there were fights, I don't know, between Sitka High and Managcombe. And I know one time there had been people getting beat up, and the Edgecombe students were really upset. And I want to say it's probably early 1970s. And so a group of them decided they were going to come over the bridge. When was the bridge built?
72, I think.
It was probably shortly after then, yeah. And people were trying to stop them because there's a pretty big group of students. And my mother was at home, and then finally she got a call from Mount Edgecombe, and they asked her to go. And students were on the bridge at the time, and she went over and she told them that they needed to go back to the dorms and was able to stop them.
Because they were going to just look for trouble.
Yep, yep. And growing up the whole time, I mean, over at Mount Edgecombe, when we lived on the island and after we moved over here, we always had lots of Edgecombe students at, Sunday, Saturday breakfast. Was a long-standing, even after she left Mount Edgecombe, we had Saturday morning sourdough pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, every single Saturday for probably 40 years.
So how many kids would come over at a time?
Maybe 10. And yes, some of the Barrow students still, we still keep in touch with them. For whatever reason, she got really close to, some of the Barrow students, Patsy Almett, and just other students. Because she really was really dedicated, her whole life to young people, and got a lot of late night calls, especially you can only imagine when, you have 700 students from all over Alaska, and
wow.
She just kind of, I think, had the right amount of discipline with enough, whatever it takes to work with young people to be really effective.
Wow. And then, so you were saying that your dad didn't show up for his wedding, and part of it was because he'd been drinking.
Yeah.
So I wonder how it was that your mother, who'd had such a horrible dad, drinking, like how she came to marry and drink, or was that just a occasional thing, or?
I think he was drinking quite a bit, but I think she told him if they were going to get married, he'd have to quit, and he did quit for probably maybe 18 to 20 years.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were growing up, was there alcohol in the house, like when you were growing up, or?
My grandfather, I'm sure, I didn't know at the time. He would come home acting strange, but the time I was probably maybe 9 or 10. I didn't know what was going on. But then my father started drinking again when I was 12 or 13, and it was pretty bad. He would, that was right around the time I think he was involved with sciatica. And he would go on business trips, and 2 or 3 day business trip, and end up being gone a week. And I never really saw him drunk. What happened is my mother ended up, bless her heart, kicking him out of the house. And told him he couldn't come back until he quit drinking. I know, I think we all thought she was pretty mean. And he ended up living in one of those really little tiny houses that they used to have across from the Westmark, kind of like the ones on,
by the Kohlers.
Yeah, so he was there, I think, for 6 months, and he ended up quitting drinking. And it was really interesting to me, too, because one of the things, and we probably lost it, so my mother was always interested in counseling. And at one point at the house, there was supposed to be a recording of when one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous was here in the 1950s, along with the first woman in AA, Marty Mann. And I don't know why, but it seems to me my mother had something to do with bringing them up here. Yeah.
Odds are.
Yep. Yep. And she was always taking counseling classes. And she was always working on her master's, which she never did complete. Because she would take us to summer school with her.
So would the master's have been in social work, or?
I don't even know. All I know is she took my younger sister Judy and I to University of Western Washington in Ellensburg, and then she took us to the University of Utah and Salt Lake City, and she was, while she was working over at Mount Edgecombe, she was always taking classes.
Wow.
So, it could have been, because she seemed to be really, really good with the students.
Yeah, it's interesting that she didn't finish.
Yeah.
But probably busy.
Yeah.
So where are you in are you the oldest or the middle? Or
Middle.
Middle, and then how many?
People always think I'm the oldest. But Barbara James is 4 years older than me, so how old is she? How old am I? So she's 66. Jennifer would have been 65. No, that can't be right. Or is it? And then Ralph would be 64. Am I not counting right? Well, Ralph is 3 years older than me, and Barbara was, Jennifer was 4 years older, and Barbara's 5 years older, and Judy's 5 years younger than me.
Wow.
So I'm definitely a middle child. Oh, and I remember too, like, one of the reasons Mom said that she had to go to work at Mount Edgecombe was because my father got TB when I was pretty young, probably two and a half. And so he was hospitalized for I think it was a couple of years over here at Mount Edgecombe.
Wow. So that was about the time they had, like, drugs were coming in?
Yeah. And then Barbara says, my sister Barbara, I remember us having to line up, and it must have been right around the time my father was in the hospital, but we had to take this awful medicine like every day. It was just horrible. But Barbara thinks it was treatment for TB. Mm-hmm. And I tested positive for TB. And I just found this out like 3 or 4 years ago. I thought it was something like fish oil, but Barbara said no, they treated everybody in the house. So I don't know how long we had to take whatever it was. It was awful. It tasted awful. And then my father built a boat, but it was a fiberglass boat. And I know because he always used to take me to the shop with him, which is probably where some of my lung problems came from. Oh. Because I think I was probably like 5 or 6. Wow. And he built it in the shop. It's now kind of like an empty lot over by Mount Edgecombe. You know where you go down to the ramp, UAS, and then you turn left to go to Mount Edgecombe. That empty lot right there. That's where he built it.
So there was a building there? Or
yeah.
Was it the old coal shed? Like,
could have been.
It,
I know it was a big empty space, and he would take me down there, and I want to say, somebody said it was like kind of along the lines of a bay liner, and it took him a long time to build. Because, like I said, he would take me down there, it must have been Saturdays or whatever, and he put it in the water, and it didn't do well, but I remember when he passed in '95, somebody had said that he ended up selling it, and that was still somewhere. Somebody had bought it in Juneau. I don't know why that came to me.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you don't remember going out on it at all?
We did. We ended up, I think, having to be towed back. The whole family, it was like an exciting trip, and then, we didn't get very far as I remember. Yeah. But I think, I don't know, I think my mother probably did really feel a kind of something missing, right? When she started the Sitka Native Education Program.
Yeah, so did she ever have any problems with alcohol or
Nope.
anything? Wow.
Nope.
That's amazing.
I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because as I've talked to different people who grew up with the cottages, it's almost like I'm learning different strategies for survival. Yeah. I think she really, she told me she got really physically ill when she would drink.
even just a little.
Do you think it was like mental, or
You know,
or she was fortunate enough to have something?
probably fortunate enough to, yeah. I mean, I saw her drink once, I think.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and I and to the day she died, bless her heart, she'd always say she'd always say how she had never really wanted to get married and she never really wanted to have children. and she says, and then she had, you know, looking back, I mean, probably on a subconscious level, I didn't even really want to think about it, but, you know, and then I started thinking about it, just, I think, you know, it took me a long time to get to get to know her, and I think to really listen to her. I mean, one of her earliest memories, she said, was standing between her mom and her dad when she was really young and begging her father not to shoot her mother.
Wow.
Yeah. And then she would talk a lot about, you know, just going down to the bars on Thanksgiving, all the holidays, and begging her parents to come home. And I think, you know, really asking her, I think I finally really asked her what kept her going. And I think that's when she started talking a little bit more, and it gave me a better idea of just how ill-equipped that she or anybody would have been to raise a family, given their experience, and to understand that a lot of her parenting would have come from being at Sheldon Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
Which isn't really...
Right, exactly. I mean, my sister Jennifer was like, well, you were really lucky because, you know, by the time you came along, she had quit asking us to do the hospital corners and trying to bounce quarters off our beds. So, right.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if she had been an ordinary mortal person, she would have died at, you know, like
Right.
age 20 or something.
Right, exactly.
Just the odds.
Yeah, I mean, really, what are the odds of, you know, growing up in an alcoholic home and having your mother die at such a young age and seeing all of that violence in the 1930s and 40s as a woman going to college and graduating, and I mean going on to do all of these amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah, or the army alone.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm bouncing all over the place.
No, yeah. Yeah, so what what was it like having her as a mom? And then also, how much awareness did you have of your Alaska Native heritage, like growing up, going to school?
You know, like I said, I don't really remember her, you know, especially in my early years, being around a lot. And I really don't even, you know, remember my father being around a lot. You know, most of my early memories are with my grandfather. She definitely was challenging. I'm sure she thought I was challenging. We weren't really connected. It upset her. I did say that before. It's like, you know, I didn't grow up with a culture. And I said that in front of her once, and she got upset. And she's like, well, I had you part of a dance group. I said, but I don't really remember a lot of that. Can we take a quick
Sure.
break? I just want to close that window unless you want to close it if I need to.
I'll plug in my light just ran out of batteries.
Oh.
So I'll plug it in there. Document all that. There's another.
Yeah. Are you getting chilly?
I'm doing pretty good.
Okay.
It's funny, this morning I was documenting this concrete structure on campus that they're gonna tear down. So, it was an old like boiler room that they added on probably in the 40s,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of hazardous, but I wanted to document it. And so when I was doing it,
Mm-hmm.
it took like a couple hours,
Yeah.
because as well as plumbing. I was like,
Oh.
so anyway, so I got really chilled this morning, and so I'm like,
Yeah.
like
It feels warm now.
exactly. Yeah. And then, so did you go to Sheldon Jackson, or?
I went to college there. I can't remember if Jennifer. So I'm pretty sure Barbara, Jennifer, Ralph, and I all went to Sheldon Jackson College for a time. Jennifer may have gone, I don't think she went to the high school. I think we didn't have that opportunity. And I think Jennifer got her associates at SJ. And when I went there, I really didn't go to class a lot.
Wow. So you graduated from Sitka High?
No, I didn't graduate. I didn't graduate, no. I went to Sitka High for, I guess, 2 freshman years, maybe. And then I went to Mount Edgecombe, and they let me enroll as a junior. And then I didn't finish there. I ended up getting my GED in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1974. Yeah, I think I finished maybe 1 year of high school.
So what were the issues or the challenges?
Well, okay. So I started drinking actually probably when I was 11.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a lot of friends that were drinking at that age. And I wasn't drinking a lot, 12, 13, 14. And it was interesting. So at Sitka High, I would say, it was just a combination. It wasn't really, what was going on at the time is, the American Indian movement, Wounded Knee, Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and I don't know where it came from, but it was pretty crazy. I had classmates that would say, "Oh, why don't you go back to the reservation?" or "Why don't you go back where you came from?" And there was prejudice. There was I was probably considered a troublemaker, and
Well, in elementary school?
In high school. By the time I got to high school and Blatchley, the middle school.
Like, how would you get into trouble?
Oh, smoking, just like minor stuff.
So how?
Skipping classes.
So I'm real, because I know now, I see a lot of the high school kids, you know, it seems like it's still mostly alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you remember that time? Like when you were, first started drinking, like what it was, what that like satisfied, or like kind of your motivations at the time?
Well, it was huge. I mean, so I grew up on the island, and I was till 8, and you wouldn't think that going from Mount Edgecombe to Sitka would be a big deal, but it was a huge deal, because at Mount Edgecombe it was almost all Native students. It was all kids that I had grown up with, and then all of a sudden in the 3rd grade, here I am with all these white students that I didn't know. It was a completely different, just blocks away. It was just such a completely different world. And that was back in the day when they tracked people, and like the smart kids were, that got good grades were in this class, and then the ones that weren't. Yeah. Well, I was in the smart kids, with the doctor's kids, and the kids of the pulp mill executives, and for a few years, but they weren't really my friends. They were kind of friends, but my friends tended more and more to be Native, and they were the ones who were struggling, and I was still always getting straight A's, and so yeah, by the time I was in the 6th grade, they were like, "Oh, can I cheat off you?" It's like, no. And it's just kind of like the place where I felt like I fit in with the Native students was really not the place that they were putting me in, was not the place that I felt comfortable. And so yeah, I kind of just really started acting out, and I would speak up when there was a lot of, like, my friends, Native friends were pretty quiet, and some of the girls would pick on them, and I didn't think that was okay. So the more aggressive white girls, I would say, if you really want to pick on someone, why didn't you pick on me? Because I will fight back. Mm-hmm. And that just seemed to get more and more. Many of my friends' parents were drinking too, and so my parents' house was kind of a refuge. A lot of kids would come over. Like I remember going over to my cousin's house, and she was one, it's like, again, one of those tiny cabins, and there was my cousin, her brother, her parents, and then usually, one or two, so like 5, 6 people in this tiny efficiency living there. And I remember I was probably 11 or 12 again, I went over to visit, and I could hear yelling and things being thrown around, and so I just thought, oh, I better wait for a while to go in. And I never said anything to her about, wow, what's going on? We knew what was going on, but we never talked about it. Mm-hmm. So I think I started seeing, and then she would get in trouble in school, and my friends would be getting in trouble in school, and
so it's almost like just like identifying with the other Native kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, at a young age, I don't know why, maybe it's the TV, like, I never really went much at all to Sitka High, my first freshman year, or my second freshman year, but, so yeah, probably by the time I was 15, I was really starting to read a lot of Vine Deloria, and, God is red, Custer died for your sins, researching researching the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service.
So Sitka High was not, how they say, relevant.
Right, exactly.
You learning that stuff
Right,
at Sitka High.
right.
That.
Where I went to Mount Edgecombe, and they were like having, more progressive teachers were starting to show up, and I would write those papers, and they'd say, "Oh, that's awesome." So I think early on, I really started seeing a lot of the biases and what do they call structural racism.
So did you feel like, so when you're like reading these books, and then like you're saying, like seeing structural racism, like I don't know if that was even a term at the time.
Right.
Did you feel, did that make you feel like aha, or did it make you feel like, oh?
It made me feel, I think both. I mean, depending, because it was interesting, because I remember I did write a paper, and it was basically on how the Bureau of Indian Affairs started. I was actually in the War Department, and it just there, by that time there were studies coming out, and just how ineffective and actually bad the dropout rates were everywhere. And it was interesting because there was these new teachers coming in, like I said, because we had, the hippie movement and more, progressives were coming in. And so I gave that presentation and wrote that paper for that one class, and the teacher was, "Oh, that's amazing, that's great, you need to give this, presentation to the freshmen." And there was a teacher there who had probably been there for 30 years and was like, "Where did you get this information? And that can't be true." And it's like, yeah, it is. So, I mean, it felt good to be able to, to identify in some small way what was going on, or what I could see going on with my friends, and people didn't talk about it at the time.
So then you moved to Albuquerque?
So my brother was going to the University of New Mexico, and as it turned out, my parents had some friends that had taught, Tom Hopkins, he might have been an administrator at Mount Edgecombe, probably in the 60s, but my mother and Vanita, his wife, had become very close friends, and they had moved to Albuquerque. And when I was having problems here, my brother somehow talked my parents into sending me down to Albuquerque, and I went to night school and got my GED.
So was it pretty soon after that you went to SJ, or?
I'd have to look. I think so. I went to so many different schools. Yeah, I want to say it's probably 78, 79. And that was interesting too. Yeah, I didn't do well in school for a long time. I'd do really well, and then I'd start drinking, and then I was either like straight A's or not showing up.
So what do you suppose, like what kind of things like triggered the drinking?
Just feeling like I didn't fit in. And also like sexual assaults, trauma, previous trauma.
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean, it was, for me it was like, I want to say I was assaulted when I was 13, date rape, and there was a lot of violence, just a lot of violence in my life for the period of about 10, 12 years. And it was really interesting because I never really talked to my parents about it. And that was kind of like when that change really came for, like there was a lot of anger and a lot of like not fitting in, because at that time, of course, nobody was really talking about rape or date rape or anything like that. And it took me a long time to figure out how to even talk about it or who to talk about it with. In fact, that was, I think, probably one of the things that really helped me understand my mother the most, as I finally got into some therapy in my late 20s, I want to say. And my mother had always, she had occasionally, not always, she had talked about sexual assault, but never in a concrete way. And I was going through a really, really tough time trying to take a look at my sexual assault and my survivor, being a survivor, and how not to drink with all of these feelings. And I thought, I knew I wanted to get through it. I knew I wanted to heal. And since I had heard my mother talk about it, I thought, well, I should talk with her. And it being that total mom form, I called her. I called her, and I told her I wanted to talk with her about some stuff. So I was going through some things, and I really wanted her advice. And she's like, okay, well, call my assistant and set up an appointment. So I did, and I set up an appointment, and I went down to her office. And I just told her, I said, look, I've heard you talk about, sexual violence, and I told her I'm going through a really tough time, and I don't really know, I want to be able to make it through this. And so I asked her, how did you make it through? And her response was really telling. She said, I grew up in the cottages, and we all just thought it was a part of life. And we all just did the best we could to make it through. And we didn't have all this newfangled stuff like therapy that you have today. So we just all did the best we could. And that really helped me to understand her a lot more, and to maybe understand a little bit more why it's so difficult for elders or anybody to talk about what was going on. Because for them, it's kind of like there was no movement, there was nobody that was talking about it.
I was thinking it's sort of like going through a car accident, but you don't get any stitches, you don't get any bones set.
Right, exactly. You just walking around with these constant open wounds. And and I mean, that helped me get to know her more. And I think it helped her to want to get to know me more too. Because I don't know that, because she was such a force, that for, maybe for, her own daughter to sit down and say, I really want to get to know who you are as a woman. And I think that my relationship with her really changed after that. Because I think she was used to being there for everyone. And having, I don't know, it just changed in a really significant way. I think that she kind of allowed me in on more than she allowed other people in on. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and that's one of, because we started, doing interviews in in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I know I'm not alone, but I was intimidated by your mother. It's just one of my biggest regrets, you know, that I didn't, you know, line something up and,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
As soon
Right.
as we started.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, just, you know, just her life was just so much, so interrelated with everything that
Mm-hmm.
school was, you know,
Yes.
for better or for worse. You know?
Right. 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 I know. And I still, you know, people talk about like, I was really disappointed, I have to say, when I first read the article that Peter Simpson had wrote called Savage. And I never really understood my mother being a part of the Presbyterian Church.
So where is that article? So that was, when was that?
Oh, you know what? It was we had a copy of it in our house, and I can't remember. I hope there's a copy someplace else, but basically, you know, the title of it was Savage, and it was, we need to turn away from the old ways, we need to not speak the language, we need to, you know, kind of most everything. I bet you it predated A&B.
Because Gil Truitt mentioned a speech that, what could it have been, a speech that was written out, or?
It was in an article in a paper from associated with SJ. But I mean, I'm sure that was kind of I'm sure that's what he said a lot.
Yeah.
And then thinking, you know, and then getting to know my mother, and it's like, okay, you know, so here is this 16-year-old girl who has grown up in unimaginable violence without any real parental figures. Thank goodness she found Aunt Louise and Uncle Ralph and Sheldon Jackson.
Because and what you said about how she said that she doesn't know what would have happened to her,
Mm-hmm.
but because Herb Diedrichson said almost the exact same thing. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened to me.
Right.
I would have gone down a bad path.
Right.
But I guess it's, you know, where like an institution isn't enough.
Right. Right. Yep.
So do you remember much from when you were going to college at SJ, like, or not going to college? like how their attitude seemed to be toward like Native students, were they?
Well, I think it was good. I mean, you know, like I had math with Kathy Newman, and it was interesting. I had some interesting discussions with Frank Roth, because he was teaching Alaskan history, and then of course there was my mother, and he would say something about A and B and A and S, and I'd say, well, yeah, but this is what my mother said. Which, you know, I mean, he probably didn't run into too often. But yeah, it was good. And then, yeah, I hated biology, but the marine biology class was awesome. Down at the Sage building, going out and doing water testing. And I never did at that time they were still mandating chapel. I flunked chapel because I never went. It was Wednesday morning.
Oh. So this is, like you were saying, it was 1979?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could kind of see that, you know, when they first started the college, but
I know.
12 years on, it's like, okay.
Yeah, I don't think it lasted too much longer after that, though. Oh, yeah, and I think was it Vesta Dominics was teaching Tlingit, but I think I probably took that like as a standalone class.
Mm-hmm.
But that was really good because it was, who was it? Oh my gosh, of all things, I took a class with Vida Davis, Ethel Mackinnon, all of these fluent Tlingit speakers, and me.
And that was on campus?
Yeah, I was in that. The classroom where they have the classroom still. Yeah.
So there was did you have a break before you finished college? Or what did you end up finishing?
Fort Lewis College, I finished in 94.
So you took a break?
I took many breaks. I went to the University of New Mexico, and I think I came back here, and I went to Sheldon Jackson. And then I took a break, and then I went to Humboldt State, and then I transferred back to UNM.
Wow.
I know, right? And then I came back here and ended up going to University of Alaska Southeast and getting my associates in 92 finally, and then graduating in 94 from Fort Lewis with a degree in sociology and human services when my son was 5. Single parent, yeah.
Wow.
18 credits a semester. Because I went down there, I was going to have full intentions of being a psychology major, and then I took my first sociology class. So I switched in my junior year to sociology, and I had to take all of my sociology in my junior and senior year.
So what was your original major?
Psychology.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Right. It's a long journey.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So you have a son, is he here in Sitka?
Yes, he works over at Search. It's so funny. He was born when Dion was 17. And as short as Dion is, he's tall. He's 6'3". He's like...
Wow. 6'3".
Yep.
There
I know. And it's so funny. He's like, there's 3 people in this world I'm afraid of, and this was a while ago. He's like, Grandma, you, and Dion.
Wow. So Dion's your daughter.
Yep.
So you must have been pretty young.
I was 17, actually. That was why I ended up withdrawing from Management when I was 17. Yeah.
So did she always grow up with your mom?
Yes. Yes. And that's an interesting story too, because I mean, when I finally quit drinking, I really wanted her to come live with me, but my mother was a force that I could not conquer. But
How old was Dion at that point?
7. And, I know it was like a similar situation with Judy and her oldest son. But I will tell you, I was just so grateful that my parents were in a position to take Dion, because she had a much better life than she would have had with me, for sure.
Wow. Yeah, speaking of force. And that's because I've known Dion a little bit for a long time, and I've never really gotten to know you at all, except as Caroline's friend, and it seems like the last few years, you and Dion have really like come into yourself. That's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what question to ask. Just that must feel really good.
It does.
I don't know.
It does. It does. I mean, so I have to tell you, so it's like, my mother, none of us, I don't think, ever questioned her or anything. And she and my father and my nephew Jeremy went down to Fort Lewis to Durango when I graduated, and it was awesome. You know, I mean, I loved all of my professors. I had a great time. My parents got to meet all of them, and we got back to my apartment, and it was just, you know, my mom, my dad, and Jeremy and my son, and we're talking, and then my mother, out of the blue, she's like, "I just don't know where I went wrong with you kids." And she used to say that all the time. And I looked at her, I said, "Were you not, you know, did you not talk, did you not hear all of these professors, you know, and all of these people that, you know, I've gotten to know, and they really like me."
So she would say that often?
Yes.
I don't know where I went wrong.
Yeah. And I finally got up the nerve. I said, "You know, when you say that, that really hurts my feelings, because I feel like you think that I'm not good enough." And I said, "You must have done something right. You must have done something right, because people think I'm okay." And I asked her to not ever say that again, and she never did.
Yeah, because it's, I know my mom is always saying, like, "Oh, you guys raised yourselves," you know, because they were always working with those people.
Right, yeah, yeah.
But, you know, so not quite the same thing, but
yeah.
in a way it's, I don't know, maybe she couldn't, well, obviously she couldn't help it, but instead of like looking at your children as, you know, people that are not you.
Yes, right,
You know?
right,
Like
right.
them as extensions
Right.
of yourself and your own guilt. And,
Yep.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. This is, you know, like I went through substance abuse treatment and did all of these, you know, therapy, and I came back probably in '86, and I was like so excited. And I was telling my family, "Oh my gosh, you guys, there's this thing called, like, you know, adult children of alcoholics, and there's therapists, and there's groups, and there's like," and they all looked at me like, "But you were the problem." It's kind of like, you were the one who was drinking. Now that you've quit, we're all fine. They weren't quite as excited as I was.
Wow. Yeah, so do you, I mean, are you conscious of a legacy? It's a really complicated legacy, isn't it, from Savage, you know, with your great-grandfather, but at the same time he was, you know, a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And then your mom.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, are you conscious of some like legacy of that? I don't know. Leadership legacy, I guess.
I think, and I think it goes further back. I mean, I love that. I love that I get to work out here, because I mean, I go further back to, I mean, we can go back to the Battle of 1804, and you know, the women had to fight right alongside the men, and I think that, you know, I have still kind of am unraveling what that legacy is, because I wouldn't be who I am without, you know, both my great-grandfather Peter Simpson and my mother, and her always, you know, really focusing on Western education, but also my father is somebody who was raised traditionally with traditional values, and that.
And that was, because Rebecca Brady told me that there's like a photo, I think think it's the one that has, maybe like 30 people in it.
Yep.
And there's one of the photos, and she said that was taken at the Ford site.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
The photograph.
wow, I
Or
didn't know
just
that there.
Or my impression that it wasn't a coincidence that, there was, these point house families who were the core of the cottages.
Wow.
So that was, you know what I mean? That was
Yeah.
that was someone else, saying, no, this is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where we're going to be, and whatever
Mm-hmm. Wow.
sacrifices it took.
Yeah,
to,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, that just that sense of history. And I think that, my mother was that force, but I think she had very, I think, interesting relationships with different people, and one of them was with Esther Littlefield. She was the one person that could scold my mother. Yes. My mom would see Esther, and Esther would be, Isabella, look at you. Get your hair fixed. You're Kicksuddy. You can't walk around like that. And I, even though that seems like a small thing, I think it was probably a really big thing for Mom, who wasn't raised with the culture, who probably had, between, Peter Simpson and Sam Singh and growing up in the cottages, like her father, she said he wasn't accepted in the Singit community because he was half Chinese. And so I think, probably her relationship with the culture and the community was pretty complex, but I also think, I probably wouldn't be able to articulate a lot of the things if my mother hadn't pushed, getting a college degree. If I hadn't gotten a degree in sociology and just grew to, love reading and
So you think that might have been part of your mother's, at least later on in her life, part of her inspiration was knowing her legacy, like where she came from?
I think so.
Oh. I wonder if that was a factor, when she was in the Army, or
Right.
or
Navy.
At some Navy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you should, no, the Army-Navy game in our house, because Dad was Army. I do, and I think it's really good to have these conversations, because I wonder too, I know, it must have been really, really good for her to, been able to have had a really, probably what was a close relationship with Charlie Joseph. And the other elders, because she didn't grow up speaking Tlingit. And she said, Charlie was always apologizing to her because he couldn't speak English very well. And she was like, no, do not apologize. Yeah.
So then he was probably a key person in making her feel welcome, even though. Because I got the impression from a couple of people who went to SJ that there was some, I don't know. I don't know, not like conflict, but not really accepting people who went to SJ. Among people who didn't go to SJ, there was some, there wasn't all flowers and and such.
Right. Oh,
Between
yeah.
people who went to SJ and people who did not.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
So it was probably really critical that he was
Mm.
so generous with.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Wow. And most of the questions I have are about, the school. Because, but this is a little different. Yeah. So I've asked every single question I have.
Mhm.
So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to.
Just that. I mean, for me, I just, again, kind of thinking back on when I first read Peter Simpson's article called Savage, and was so disappointed, and then having taken the time to go back and research, and like reading that Davis case and reading the dissertation about from Rudolph Walton's journals, and just kind of gathering information about really what it was that so many people were fighting to survive at the time, that everything is really, really, really not black and white, that there are so many gray areas, and that we can't get to those unless we take the time to study and research and read and talk with each other.
And at the same time, it seems like, people like Rudolph Walton and Peter Simpson, they were, they had some guiding light. I mean,
Yes.
they were,
Yes.
they were fighting for education,
Yeah.
betterment,
Yeah.
future for
Yeah.
their kids.
Right? Because, and that's one of the things is, if we take a look at federal Indian policy and what was going on at the time, it's like, like William Paul, and they all had to be able to read and see, reservations, and see, oh my gosh, where are they going to send us? And the fear of having to go someplace else, or being, just being treated like any other tribe from South 48.
Mm-hmm. Losing everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you suppose, looking at the future, because a lot of these, these things that people struggle with, in their 20s and 30s, it's still with us, with the, the schools, still
Yep.
the same challenges. Like what do you see as the future? Like what's that light that you're fighting toward?
I think it's really interesting to me. So I've spent most of my career in human services, social services, and I started off as a alcohol, I don't even know, counselor or tech or something. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I think what I was thinking, oh, geez, maybe I can help some of my friends. And a lot of them, many of them have passed, and many of them due to alcohol and drug-related deaths, suicide. And then I thought, well, maybe I can help my children. And sadly, my son has lost, he's 29, and he's lost a number of friends already to the same thing. And then I think of my grandchildren. And I can see the wisdom of looking to the 7th generation now, because it takes time. But I think if the one thing would be is to be able to have pride and have that sense of self, as to who we are. That strong sense of identity, because I think without it, I think that's when we reach out and are trying to hurt other people, because we don't have that strong sense of who we are, and we don't feel safe. When I feel safe within who I am, and the knowledge of who I am, and who my clan is, and who my clan relatives are, and who's going to be there,
I mean, so many of us are, mutts.
Yeah, right?
So it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then the thing, what is fascinating to me is the more people are finding with, it's like, okay, if I go back, we'll go back. Alcoholism was a moral issue, period, boom. Mm-hmm. And then, it's a disease. And then, and it going through all these different stages, and now what they're finding is that, the alcoholism and addiction are an answer to a lack of connection.
Mm-hmm. So that's what you'd like to see as, like, going forward, more of a sense of connection and acceptance and pride in
Yes.
our individual,
Yes.
like who we are.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'll buy it for that.
I know, right? Just a small thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.